Hi, I'm Rick Jenkins, and I'm the publisher at GSA Business Report, and welcome to another episode of Coffee With. And today I'm having coffee with Terry Keating, who is the President and CEO at Accord Financial. Terry, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
I appreciate you being here. Terry, you have been with Accord Financial for about 6 years, and you have been the President and CEO here in the Greenville market for about 2 years, I believe.
Yes, sir.
I'm rounding, of course. And you've got about 30 years of experience in the financial services arena, servicing mostly mid-sized companies, right?
30 plus, but we don't have to go into the plus.
I understand that, believe me. I'm there as well. Before we get into Accord Financial, let's talk a little bit about you. Now, you're not from around here.
No,
Where are
sir.
you from?
I was born and raised in Seattle, Washington, actually in a little community called Medina, which today is the home of Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Russell Wilson.
Wow, you're in good company.
It was a little more modest when I grew up there.
Yeah.
And then just before high school, my dad's work took us to Chicago, and I spent 30 years there, high school, college in Northwest Indiana, and then was a banker in Chicago most of my days before I had the opportunity to come here 6 years ago.
And you came to Greenville, South Carolina.
Yes,
now,
sir.
what do you think of Greenville? Be careful now.
Well, I don't need to be careful. So I've been coming to Greenville off and on for many years. I used to lend money to finance companies, and there's some well-known finance companies here. So I've been coming. So I knew Greenville was pretty nice. Now, I hadn't been here in probably 4 or 5 years, and when I came down, and what I thought was a nice city had turned into a wow city.
Yeah.
And my wife and I are big city folks. We lived in downtown Chicago, right by the Wrigley Building, and so it's certainly different, but I can't imagine another city of this size that would be so comfortable for real city people to live in. And it's got the best of all worlds.
I love the way you said that. It's cost of living is a little better here than the West Coast or Chicago, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Although it's climbing.
Right, yeah, you're right, it is.
Especially if you want to live downtown.
Well, we're no longer a hidden gem.
No, sir.
No, we're not. All right, let's talk about Accord Financial. Corporate headquarters in Toronto.
Correct.
Now, I believe you have 6 locations, and I don't know if I'll remember them all, so you might have to help me, but you're in Toronto, you're in Vancouver, you're in Montreal, you're in Chicago, you're in Santa Monica, and you are in little old Greenville, South Carolina. Did I get them? Is that right?
I got them.
How did you get into South Carolina in Greenville?
Sure. Well, the business was founded in 1978 in Toronto. And our founder, Ken Hitzig, took the business public in 1992 and used the proceeds to buy a financing business in Montreal and buy a financing business here in Greenville that had been around for about the same amount of time. It was then called JTA Factors. And that has grown into what Accord is today, and no one's ever come up with a good reason for the business not to be here.
Right.
And so we are still here. It's been great for us.
That's a good way to put it. Now, if I'm going to oversimplify what you do at Accord Financial, let me see if this kind of sums it up a little bit. You are a financial services company that provides services to companies that are in some form of transition.
Yes.
That might be growth, it might be expansion, it might be a merger, it might be acquisition, or it might be simply a restructuring of debt. That sum it up?
Pretty well.
Yeah?
It does, pretty well.
Talk about that a little bit.
Well, so it's about half of what we do is acquisition finance, primarily for independent private equity sponsors. It's a whole long technical conversation, probably not for today. And the other half are businesses, as you described it, some form of a restructuring. Probably been with a bank for a while, and the bank has said to them in one way or another, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here anymore.
Right.
And so they come to us, and we're able to finance them while they get themselves back on their feet. And they stay with us for 2 or 3 years, and we hope they graduate back to a commercial bank.
Well, let's talk about banking for a second. Why come to you instead of going to a bank? What's the difference there?
Sure. We're going to be able to be a little bit more flexible than a bank in some ways, and we are going to take on those situations where the bank credit officers aren't comfortable. They've had poor earnings for a couple quarters or a couple years, and so they're not going to get financing from that more conventional source, if you will. All of our financing is predicated on the asset values, the collateral, and so we can take on a little bit more risk because we have that backstop of the collateral, frankly, and then we get paid a little bit of a premium for taking a little bit extra risk.
Yeah. You know, I would think in your job that you all would be a sort of maybe guidance counselor, advisor. I mean, if I'm coming to you and I'm asking for millions of dollars, I'm going to want somebody that I can trust. I'm going to want somebody who has got 30 plus years of experience, and I'm going to want the benefit of that experience. Do you find that to be the case?
Virtually all the time,
Yeah.
right? You know, money is very fungible. You can borrow from a lot of people, and I think your point about being someone that you can trust, that trust, it goes both ways. We obviously have to trust our customer, but they need to trust that we're going to be good to our word, and we're going to treat them in a fair, reasonable manner. And that there are times we get inbound referrals, and we'll look at the situation and realize, you know what, this company they're actually doing well. They should borrow from somebody who's going to be a little bit less costly to it, and we'll tell them that.
Right. So you got some transparency there.
So we want to have transparency.
Yeah.
I mean, that's our reputation, and that's something that lives forever.
Right. Well, that builds trust.
Right.
I would think also that sometimes you have to control expectations. How often does someone come into your office and say, you know, I need $15 million, and in the back of your mind you're thinking, you're not getting $15 million, or that's not where you need to be, and how does that conversation unfold?
They can be uncomfortable at times, but we're pretty well versed at it.
Yeah. So it does happen.
I would say it's either how much debt that they can or should take on, or the pricing expectations, or some of the other terms. Probably 98% of the time, there's some adjustment of expectations. That's how I would put it. And
that's a nice way to put it.
You learn to be tactful, but be direct, and to be clear why it is. We want people to understand, we can't do what you're asking, here's why.
Right.
But here's what we can do.
Well, let's talk about that. So there's always impediments to getting financing, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has to overcome something for the most part.
Right.
What are those impediments?
Having the wrong expectations,
Yeah.
for sure. But I would say the bigger thing is not really doing your planning and your homework about your business, and understanding why you need to borrow, how you're going to pay that back,
Right.
and how you are going to make a third party like us comfortable with your ability to pay it back and your ability to run the business. And that doesn't mean just making the widgets, but planning and thinking about the future and being very methodical about it.
Sure. So is this a good time to be asking? Is this a good, the economy?
For money?
The economy
heavens.
continues to kind of truck along.
Yeah.
Is this when people should be coming to you and asking that question?
Well, they should come to us whenever they need money and can't borrow from a bank.
Right.
So that's when they should come to us. But in the 30-odd years that I've been in the finance sector, there's probably other times that have been as good for borrowers. But if there was a time that was better, I don't know that I remember when it was. There is simply so much money in the financial system looking for a home, and it makes it very competitive. It makes it very hard for us. We have a lot of competitors who will be pretty aggressive with what they'll do.
Right.
So yeah, it's a good time to be a borrower.
So what does your crystal ball say? As you look into that crystal ball, what's the economy going to look like a year from now, a year and a half from now, 2 years from now?
It's going to be different.
Yeah?
That's my crystal ball. We seem to be in a period where there's more uncertainty and there seems to be more turmoil, right? Politics aside, there's a trade war and there's disruption in supply chain and there's issues in the auto industry. And so all of those things, have led to some reduction of activity. On the other hand, 70% of the U.S. economy is consumer spending driven. And the consumer feels good right now. Household debt levels, although up from the recession, are still at almost historic lows. Unemployment is as low as we've ever seen it, certainly in 50 years.
Right.
Lower than most trained economists would say is possible. I remember reading not long ago the unemployment rate here in South Carolina is 1.8%.
Right.
So when the consumer feels good and they can always get a job, they're going to continue to spend. And so the economy, barring some unforeseen thing, should continue to go along at a decent pace.
The loan approval rate in the upstate of South Carolina is as good as there is in the Southeast.
Yeah.
It's the highest in South Carolina. So that, coupled with the unemployment rate, that is a little under 3% now, I think bodes well for us.
It does.
So Accord Financial, let's talk a little bit about what the future is. You
Sure.
guys, of course, started in Canada, and you're moving south, right?
Right.
You made that big jump down to Greenville. Where are you going to go next? What's the future?
Right. Yeah, so we came to the U.S. One of the principal reasons, size of the market, bigger opportunity here. The U.S. economy is 8.5 times the size. When we look out, though, in the future, the asset-based lending and factoring, receivables factoring that we do, long-term probably becomes obsolete. There's some real fundamental changes happening in the payment system, how businesses interact with each other, how they pay each other. And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time about, I spend a lot of time thinking about, is how do we transform ourselves and be in the payment system in a different way. And so, we don't know what we'll look like in 5 or 10 years, but we know it'll be different. We know technology is going to drive a lot of that change. We may or may not still be in this business in this form, but we'll probably be in other businesses that get referred to as supply chain finance or trade finance, or just some other form of the payment system that we haven't even thought of today.
Right. All right, folks, that's another episode of Coffee With, and we appreciate you joining us. Keep on the lookout for future episodes. You can find them on our YouTube page. See you next time.